And we're back to semester 2 of entrepreneurship, and we're starting off with what I think is a really interesting topic. This is ethics and social responsibility, and we kind of get to see where businesses are put in either difficult decisions where maybe both people are right and maybe not. But then we kind of get to look at this from multiple perspectives, and that's what kind of interests me. There's a legality perspective from all of this, and then what's ethically right and things we should do. So we're going to jump right into this topic. And I warn you, there are a lot of words. It's not a very visual topic. It's kind of all about what's inside of us and how we feel. So, formal definition of ethics is a set or moral principles or values that govern behavior. That is, all of the decisions that we make on a day-to-day basis, and all of our ethics are different, all of our moral principles or values. And an easy example is that some of us here in all of my classes are willing to potentially cheat or go beyond what is normally acceptable to pass a test. Other people are saying or would say, "Hey, I would rather fail that test than cheat." Those are two ethics, and I'm not really in no way, shape, or form am I pointing the finger at anybody in any of my classes. But reality is, in just about every school and every class somewhere, there is someone that is willing to push that boundary. That's just most likely the way it is in any school. But as we tie this back to businesses develop their own set of principles that help guide them in their culture. And a lot of times that's set down by the founder of the company. And it kind of sticks through the business as it changes and grows. And some of those ethics you guys would totally disagree with. Some of them everyone is for. I can tell you there are a bunch of companies that function on the bottom 10% rule, where the bottom 10% of the company, as part of their evaluation process, is essentially replaced. So there is always this little bit of pressure cooker to not be the worst or the bottom 10% in the company. That's just part of their ethics. That's what they believe is right in business. They believe in that competitive mindset. Ethics reflect a company's beliefs about what actions are appropriate and fair among the people. And what I love about this is that we get to talk about this in a bunch of different ways. So, we get to go into a bunch of different stories, I should say, that have actually happened among companies that you guys know. So, the next thing we're talking about is the actual code of ethics, and that is the document that outlines the principles of context that should be used in making decisions within the organization. So, here's an example for you. So, and this is a code of ethics that I found from what's called a CFP. And a CFP is a certified financial planner. And what they go ahead and do is they help people plan for retirement. And they tend to run businesses. Some of the companies are Edward Jones, Raymond James. My wife works for one called Oxford. And they manage people's money or assets so that they can live a standard of living that they want. In essence, they help people plan for retirement or stay wealthier, give money to their children, so on and so forth. A certified financial planner has a code of ethics that they tend to follow in order to obtain that designation of being a CFP. And that's listed on the left here. They act with honesty, integrity, and competence and diligence. They act in the client's best interests. They exercise due care. They avoid or disclose and manage conflicts of interest. They maintain confidentiality and protect the privacy of client information. And they act in a manner that reflects positively on the profession of being a certified financial planner. So one of the things they do is, and I'm going into this on the right here, is they choose various funds or stocks for people to buy. And the example I give here is that an advisor invests $100,000 for a client, and they have a number of different options in the fund that they're going to choose. Just like everything else, there is a bunch of competition, and these funds are usually a bunch of stocks. So they might pick a technology fund, and that fund might have things like Apple and Google and Cisco and Nvidia and all of these different technologies in that fund that it owns various shares of. So it is a mix of stocks. And a lot of the times they have very similar performance, like performance that is within a 0.1% of each other. So one fund makes 10.1%, the other one makes 10.2% in a given year. However, sometimes those funds have different what's called expense ratios or different payouts. So the example here is that the client puts $100,000 into a Fidelity fund, and that having that money in that Fidelity fund pays the CFP, the advisor, 1%. $100,000, 1%, that's $1,000. The Vanguard fund, though, has a very similar performance and only pays 0.5%. So instead of making $1,000, the CFP now makes $500. Now, I ask a bunch of questions on this. Do we have potentially a conflict of interest? Is this even relevant, right? And does the advisor communicate how he or she made the decisions to the client? Stop the video here, and let's have this discussion. And if you didn't understand what I explained, ask Mr. Barron questions, and happy to answer. But this is just an example of an ethical decision that tends to need to be made. I'm going to wait 10 seconds, and then I'll keep going. All right, we're back. I hope that discussion was good and relevant, and let's keep going. So, what is in the content of our ethical codes? And we kind of just had an example there from CFP board. I'm going to show you another one in a second. But a lot of those things are things like adhering to the law, honesty, product safety and quality, health and safety in the workplace, conflicts of interest. This one is always an interesting one to me because conflicts arise that were not always discussed or people didn't know about, so on and so forth. And it's always interesting. Employment practice, selling and marketing practices. We'll talk about this one in a specific case in a couple days. Financial reporting. This one has always been a problem for businesses because how they reflect their financial reporting is how the stock market reflects what they've done. So if a company was willing to hide their actual financials, they would be potentially lying to investors and shareholders, right? And inflating their business. So now we've learned a little bit about finances, and it'll be fun to talk about that again. Pricing, billing, and contracting. So kind of all these things go into it. What we just talked about was trading in securities. A security is another word for a stock, a mutual fund, a bond, or an ETF, and those are just what investors deal with. Acquiring using info about competitors. This one's always comes up, and when this comes up, we always tend to lead towards a discussion about what China does and how China kind of crosses those lines or pushes those lines, especially when they make agreements in getting into doing business within their country. Security. We have a good example of that with Apple coming up, and payments to obtain business. Political activities, protection of the environment. All these are just awesome, interesting discussions, and we'll talk about them in a little bit more detail as we go on in this section. All right, but here's another example for you. Now, this is the National Automobile Dealers Association, and the Dealership Association, this is where dealerships can join this NADA and their code of ethics, and they can all agree to follow these things where they pledge to follow, operate the business in accord with the highest standards of ethical conduct, treat each customer in a fair, open, and honest manner, prohibit discrimination of any kind, meet the transportation needs of our customers in a knowledgeable and professional manner, represent our product clearly, factually, standing fully behind our warranties, direct and implied, and in all other ways justifying the customer's respect and confidence, right? And it goes on and on and on. And it allows a bunch of dealers to say, hey, we follow this code of ethics. We all subscribe to this. We believe in it. Now, saying you have a code of ethics and actually believing or doing it are two different things. And that is kind of where, the discussion always comes in as well. Like, all these companies have this great code of ethics, but how do they make sure people are held accountable to it? So I showed you a little bit of content from NADA, and another point in which to stop and have a discussion is, do you think my code of ethics is different than that of a police officer's, and why? And then I'll come back, pause it, and I'll come back shortly. All right, we're back. Hope that was a great discussion, and let's keep going. What about standard businesses or run-of-the-mill businesses? Do you think they have a code of ethics? Do you think Frito-Lay had a code of ethics? So this is PepsiCo's code of ethics, and they publish it, and it is respect in the workplace, trust in the marketplace, fairness in our business relationships, honesty in business conduct, purpose in our world. And as an employee, we went through training on this every year. And there's one thing I can remember in particular, and it was always really interesting to me, and that was there was a prohibition against bribing customers. And we had an expense account, right? And I could go and take someone out to dinner. I couldn't really buy them gifts per se, but as you went up the chain of command above my position, you had a larger and larger expense account in which that you could use to take care of customers, take care of your team, so on and so forth. And as I worked in different teams in the Northeast and the Chicago area, they treated money a little bit differently. And it wasn't good or bad, but the example they used when teaching this was that it was illegal to pay politicians in South America. And why do you think they use that, I guess, or why was that the example in the training? It had to do with the fact that that was a common occurrence. If you wanted to bring your new product into whatever government, state, or territory or country, oftentimes you had to bribe somebody. That was just the way it was for years. And at some point they decided we were not going to do business this way, and it was leading down a dark and slippery road, and that we were just going to focus on, hey, PepsiCo wants to come in, put people to work, and just compete. And that was our go-to for starting or trying to open new businesses in new areas. Now, it was not my job or anything I had to do with, but it was something that we all had to go through as part of employees throughout the entire company. Everyone went through code of conduct training. All right, so back to kind of what I was saying, and if I'm going too fast, stop me at any point. Merely establishing a code of ethics does not prevent unethical behavior. To be effective, these codes must be enforced. And so let's talk about that real quickly. Companies have to discipline who violates their code of ethics, right? So what does that mean? So 90% of the time, if you're working in a business, you're behaving in a manner that is ethical. And you're representing the company as a whole. So if you do something that is unethical, whatever that is, there are a number of different consequences. You can end a business person's career if you attack a person directly. You can cause or lose hundreds of thousands of millions of dollars depending on the size of the business. You can force a company to go out of business. And we have I have a couple examples of that. However, when you do behave the way that you should ethically, the way that we think so, you build your own personal brand as a person, and then for the company, you further the influence of that brand by doing good and positive things. You work with your suppliers and you help build that brand, right? If you're in the middle, you're buying something from somebody and selling it to somebody else, right? Apple has a brand that they work with you guys that they sell to their end consumer, right? You guys are the customer, the consumer using the product, so on and so forth. But they also have a way that they act with the people and the companies that they're buying products from, right? They buy a bunch of components from all over the world to have things put together, right? They have a brand and they act ethically, I hope, with those businesses as well. And there are some questionable stories in some of the businesses that Apple buys from, and we can talk about those as well. So, I'm going to talk about employee theft is kind of one that that's probably where most of you guys are in business. You probably have seen employee theft and things like falsifying records or lying about hours worked. Someone trying to get an extra 15 minutes or be on the clock and really they're on break and so on and so forth. So some statistics about theft, and we're almost done. The amount stolen from U.S. businesses by employees, these are the people working for those companies, is $50 billion. This is annually. Percent of annual revenue lost to theft or fraud on average is 7%. The percent of employees who have stolen at least once from their employer, this might be the smallest thing. This might be you're a busboy and you're not supposed to have the soup and yet you get a bowl of soup, right? That type of thing. 75%. Employees who have stolen at least twice from their employer, 37.5%. Of all business bankruptcies caused by employee theft is 33%. About 1 in 3. Percent of theft by employees who had ideas stolen at work, 29%. Average time fraud occurs before detected is 2 years. So I saw a little bit of this in retail in college, where people would use or manipulate the system, I should say. And think of it this way: when you immediately think of theft, you think about someone taking someone out of the door. That's not usually the way it happens. The way it happens might be you're given a gift, or you're given a product to test, or you buy something at discount from your retailer, right? And then you go ahead and maybe you give it to someone else, and they with the intention of them returning it. Well, right there, you got it at a discount, they're returning it at full price. Now we have a theft problem, and we have the company is literally losing money and margin to that product. That's still theft. And that can happen in a number of different ways and a number of different forms. People get really smart and intelligent about how this goes on. But businesses do think of their customers as one of their greatest markets, right? You're in the store all the time. You see what's going on. You work in Kohl's. You see what's on sale. When it's on sale, you know how to get the best price, right? And then you probably have your own employee discount. So things like that can be a major problem for a business. But I always thought these theft statistics were pretty interesting. That's the end of part 1. This gets interesting as we go into the next couple weeks about this. We have one more section, and then this kind of wraps up with some work and some projects and some discovery. And it's a fun section, at least for me, to see you guys kind of enlightened about all the craziness that has occurred in the business world. We might even touch on Enron a little bit and see, because that is absolutely mind-boggling. But anyways, welcome back. I hope that was decent and interesting, and we will have some fun throughout the rest of the week on ethics and social responsibility.